Hello everyone, I'm George from Ireland. Ooh, doing up my button. Sorry, I don't want to appear before you naked. In this video, I'm going to ask what a Hillary Clinton presidency would have looked like. So I like to play counterfactual history. Hillary being president is never going to happen now. You have one chance and she blew it. I know it's pretty unlucky with the breakdown of the votes across the states. That's the way the cookie crumbles with the electoral college. But cast your minds back just over 4 years. If 80,000 votes in those three swing states had gone the other way, she would have been president of the United States, the first woman to hold that office. And the United States is, I'm pretty sure I'm right in saying, unique in the Western world, and actually rare in the world as a whole, never to have been led by a woman. I mean, any other Western countries had a woman as prime minister or president or at least a queen. I'm not sure I can think of any that hadn't had a woman as either prime minister or president. And okay, a lot of them don't have monarchs. Quite a few African countries, Latin American countries, quite a few Asian countries have been led by a woman. India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, they've all been led by women. Even China had a woman as prime minister in the 5th century AD, and also had empresses. But coming back to the United States, she could have got those votes. I'm sure she wished she could have taken a few votes from California and put them into Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, but you can't. Or more likely than, say, people who are not voting Republican voting Democrats, if more people had voted Democrat who didn't bother to vote at all, or people had voted who'd voted for the minor parties actually voted for the Democrats, or perhaps not quite so many Republicans voted, because 2016 was a very strong performance by the minor parties, the Green Party in particular, to a lesser degree the Reform Party and the Libertarian Party. They got 6% of the vote between them, which was their best showing since 1992, Ross Perot and all that. Or think about this time when the three small parties between them got 0.5%, because Trump is so polarizing. People had to take a view on that. You either wanted to keep him in office or you were absolutely determined to kick him out. So Hillary Clinton calls herself a feminist. She would have been the first feminist president of the United States. Whether she's a progressive or a moderate, she was humming and hawing about that, always very vacillating, very calculating. What would the electoral effect of me saying this or doing that? So it came across as too circumspect, perhaps a bit false. And she was, cold like that, and he seemed insincere. I know, look at Trump, look how insincere he is, how rampageously mendacious he is. But anyway, she would have come in and she would have a very different style, of course. She's a very well-known public figure, been something of a public figure since the late 70s, since the Watergate hearings, and then as First Lady of Arkansas in the 80s and early 90s. Well, she would have made more sensible appointments. As I say, she's quite cautious. There wouldn't have been this chaos there was under Trump's, all the constant sackings and resignations and dozens of ambassadorial posts still not filled. I think I'm right in saying that some ambassadorial posts have been vacant for 4 years under Trump. So she was certainly someone who did her homework. She was diligent, whatever her flaws, and yes, they were legion. So things would have been more predictable. She wouldn't have been flying off the handle as Trump is, and Trump has managed to channel rage politics. I think that is his main success. I know I consider it rebarbative, but he achieved what he wanted to do. Not really policies he wanted to implement, but just to hog the limelight, just to make people angrier, amplify grievances. So she would have stayed in the Paris deal. There's often the things that she would not have done to point out. No sign that she was going to pull out of that. It was even a little bit unexpected for Republicans that Trump did that. And I know some Republicans applauded him for doing it. She would honour the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, commonly called the Iran deal, not up to the ante with regard to Iran. And therefore, Iran would have carried on abiding by that, not enriching uranium, not coming close to the nuclear bomb as they are now. I don't see any evidence that she would have gone to war against Iran. There was no reason to do so. The United States itself, the United Nations, they signed off on the scrupulosity of the Iranians on abiding by their solemn commitments. It was the United States that reneged upon this international treaty. So the Iranian economy would have been going better. I mean, the conflict in Syria would have bubbled along. She would have been more robust in launching airstrikes against the Assad regime for his crimes against humanity, the numerous large-scale chemical weapons attacks that he and his Russian allies have carried out against civilian targets. So, but would that have changed their behaviour? I presume probably not, because I imagine they saw that as the one that was the sort of equaliser, the only way they could hold their own against ISIS, the al-Nusra Front, and so on, the Free Syria Army, was by using these chemical weapons attacks, so that they might think, well, it's worth it. We're going to have to. If they're very, very heavy bombing raids by the United States and her allies, perhaps the Syrians and the Russians would have changed their opinion on that one, because Assad's forces are very weary. They've suffered huge amounts of casualties. A lot of the country is wrecked, and they just don't have much numerical superiority. The Russians don't want to have to commit too many troops or too much material to that, and they know that they launch a chemical weapons attack, they can just wipe out thousands of people, combatants and civilians alike. But the thing that I think is odd is, why on earth did countries like the United States just not send millions of gas masks and whatever other equipment they need to protect people from gas attacks, and thereby, what would be the word, like just obliterate that advantage they have, or render it obsolescent, perhaps that the word, negate the effect of these poison gas attacks. But I'm not sure, perhaps these nerve agents are so quick acting, a person wouldn't have time to get his gas mask on time. I'm told you need to be able to do it in under 8 seconds. So other things about the embassy shifted to Jerusalem. Would she have done that? I'm not sure. I don't know if it's part of a platform to recognise Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, because various presidential candidates like George W. Bush and Barack Obama said they would do that, but they left the US embassy in Tel Aviv. So she might have done that. I think a bit less likely, because she would have been chary about provoking America's Arab friends too much. And actually, they didn't throw the toys out of the pram. There was remarkably little pushback on that, because the Palestinian cause appears to be a forlorn hope. They have been left in the lurch by their Ishmaelite brethren, left to their fate, and that's it. Life intolerable for them. So much of Gaza, the West Bank, have left the country, which is a success for Israel. That was the whole idea of controlling their airspace and their territorial waters and their land borders, and all the water, gas, electricity, and really everything else that goes in and out of Palestine. Well, certainly in Gaza, the access to and the egress from Palestine, so the Israelis can just choke them if they get uppity. And there would have been no trade war with China. And one of the few things in which Trump is correct on is it yes, that China steals intellectual property massively, but this has been going on since the early 90s. The United States, other countries, they could have taken a firm stand in the 90s, but they didn't, and China's just unstoppable now. They're too big a beast. You can't defeat them. The United States is not their only market by a long shot. They can cope with this. They have got, long memories. They think in long time scales. Their people are willing to suffer. There is no public opinion. They're not allowed an opinion. Their media is all state controlled. So you can't shift public opinion saying, okay, we can't take it, let's give in. That's not going to work with them. And they're all about face. They don't want to blink, because then they would lose face. So that would have meant for the economy to have no trade war, no damaging relations with Mexico, none of this twaddle about a wall which has not been built, which is not funded by them. So no racialist screeds, so better race relations consequently. So with regard to the Ukrainian conflict, as in she would have taken a firm stance, she was said to be particularly detested by Putin, and she'd often spoken up for pro-democracy demonstrators in Russia, which Putin found to be outrageous when he was flagrantly cheating in the elections. As the joke goes, America doesn't know this election result for 8 days afterwards, but in Russia they'd know their election result 8 years before. Because the president always wins. The establishment, the securocrats, they obviously just rig it flagrantly. So she would have armed Ukraine. More cordial relations might have been a state visit to Ukraine, or receiving one from the president of Ukraine. So then the Russians would have been really mired there, that NATO is just not backing down, is not letting up. The United States is funding the Ukrainian war effort. So Russians realise they're not really making ground there. And that might have said, as they got iron will we withdraw from Luhansk and or Donbass? I don't think anything would induce them to give up Crimea. So they would have been more hemmed in. Putin would have been in his box. Ruth Bader Ginsburg might have felt comfortable enough to retire, knowing that another Democrat could appoint a replacement. But admittedly, obviously, you've got to get that past the Senate, and the senatorial hearings if they'd been Republican dominated, and assuming that Republicans still had that, would not have put a particularly liberal judge there. Anyway, Hillary would have tried to put another pro-abortion judge there. So one of the main things is there would have been a rational response to coronavirus. Now, I dislike Hillary Clinton intensely. She's often bigoted, she's dishonest, but she is logical and she recognizes what science is. So when these virologists and epidemiologists say we need to do this about coronavirus and that's what's going to happen, she would defer to their superior knowledge. She's not ultra-crepidarian like Trump. She would say, well, I don't know the first thing about it, so I'm going to be guided by expert opinion. Obviously, there's a range of opinion, but finding as close to a consensus as you can, trading the medical imperatives off against economic and other considerations. So being an earlier lockdown, not being in denial about it, sensible advice, not politicizing it, no flagrant lying, telling people to put disinfectant into their lungs or drivel like that, and then a prompt and proper lockdown would have got it under control sooner, distributing aid amongst the states as she needed to. And then if you had a firm and timely lockdown, you could get out of it sooner and get the economy growing. So in terms of Black Lives Matter, I mean, presumably these police shootings would still have happened. I mean, you can't control every police officer, and policing is usually a state affair, not a federal affair. And federal officers, I can't think the last time the federal officers killed somebody in a controversial situation. So recognize that there is grave injustice here, so we need to tackle that. The police should not be killing unarmed people just because of their race. And obviously at the same time upholding law and order. Obviously vandalizing buildings is completely unacceptable. Even the police have murdered somebody. But, law and order also includes the police. They too have to obey the law. And they too have to behave in an orderly manner. Only to kill someone when absolutely unavoidable. So she would have been better in so many ways. And, so incumbent presidents are usually re-elected 75% of the time. And if the economy is going all right, having handled coronavirus sensibly, the United States the US economy would have been better. There are other things. That pandemic unit, she would have inherited that from Obama. There would be more of a smooth transfer. They wouldn't have closed that down. And therefore, they would have had a contingency plan in place to deal with such an eventuality should it arise. And indeed, it did arise. So I think a Hillary Clinton presidency would have been far superior. She would not have been undermining NATO, not have degraded America's reputation in so many other ways, perhaps not inspired some people like Bolsonaro to win elections in other countries. So it's a pity that Hillary Clinton presidency didn't happen. Instead, we had this sort of execrable person with this oafish behavior in the Oval Office for a few years. Good riddance to him. I wish we'd never hear from him again, but sadly, I don't think that he will stop publishing his outrageous lies and gross insults. There we are. Hillary Clinton, never going to hold high office again. She's kind of past it. She's yesterday's woman. And no, she's not that old. She's not as old as Joe Biden, but maybe the public are a bit bored of her. She provoked a very negative reaction in a lot of people. There was visceral hatred for her, as there is for Trump, although in Trump's case it's rational, because he's just such a foul goblin. So in some ways she's quite a poor candidate. Two of the highest negative ratings for candidates ever. Whereas Biden, I don't think anybody detests him. A grandfatherly figure, maybe, he's not quite all there. A lightweight, plagiarize things from people. But I don't get the notion that there are many people who feel odium for him. Many people abominate Trump, and rightly so. So that's Hillary Clinton. That's what I reckon would have happened in her presidency. Toodaloo.